Hello, my name is Astana Gaffney, and my ARP topic is about how poetry can teach philosophy. Philosophy, which is the study of the fundamental nature of knowledge, reality, and existence, has often been an intriguing subject for scholars and avid thinkers alike. Western philosophy has its origins in ancient Greece, which is where the well-known philosophers Plato and Aristotle hail from. Eastern philosophy, though culturally different, is also just as important and influential. Still, philosophy continues to be studied today by modern philosophers such as Nietzsche, Jean-Paul Sartre, and Dante. While there are many ways to teach and present philosophy, one such method is through poetry. Poetry has long been a form of art used to convey emotions and communicate messages. Some popular philosophers that also wrote poetry include Du Fu, Dante, and Soren Kierkegaard. Poetry is useful for expressing ideas and emotions because of its creative nature. In terms of philosophy, poetry can be used to express themes and messages that correspond to relating philosophies. A well-known English poet, Samuel Coleridge, states, "No man was ever yet a great poet without being at the same time a great philosopher." As a form of literature and literary expression, poetry has been a behemoth of influence on society. According to the book Poetry 101 by Susan Dalzell, since the early civilizations, people wrote poetry, recited poems, taught lessons, or told stories. In her study, Professor Alvarez of California State University describes the positive impacts writing and speaking poetry has on people. Alvarez asserts that poetry provides an innate ability to become an outlet for expressing emotions. Poetry allows the writers to work through their emotions in order to put them into a creative piece. Participants in the study were able to work through their emotions and feelings in a positive way. The writing and performing of poetry helped many participants improve on multiple skills such as social interaction, better public speaking, and a deeper understanding of their emotions. These very skills were necessary when examining philosophy because of the need for analytical and reflective skills. This is in part why poetry is beneficial for studying and teaching. The product of this academic research paper is a lesson plan constructed for high school English or philosophy teachers to show to their students. This lesson follows the Madeline Hunter lesson plan style. Here are the objectives for the lesson plan, which include a deeper understanding of philosophy, seeing the educational benefits of using poetry, and more. This lesson plan provides a list of required materials and resources shown here. These include the different poems used, which will correlate to different philosophies. First, the teacher should show students a video of spoken word poetry to introduce the topic. I have provided 2 examples. Then the teacher should ask what students already know about philosophy and poetry. Afterward, ask the students how the message in the video previously shown in the anticipatory set was enhanced because it was delivered through means of spoken word poetry. To conclude the warm-up, recap for the students about their understanding. There are 3 poems in the lesson plan. Each poem is shown in the lesson plan with prompts that are meant to allow students to think critically about each poem. Afterwards, I've included explanations for the poems and why they are philosophical in nature. The first is called Ozymandias by Percy Shelley. As one can see, the poem, prompts, and explanations are shown here. The second poem is by Jean-Paul Sartre. And the last poem is by the 12th century poet Jacquirin. The philosophies that correspond to the poems are entropy, or the idea that power is never permanent, existentialism, and wabi-sabi, respectively. The lesson plan ends with students recapping what they learned through the lesson and how their understanding of philosophy changed. If the lesson plan were to be continued, ask the students to bring in their own poem that they believe has philosophical undertones and be prepared to present it to the class. Then have them write their own poem that corresponds to a philosophy of their choosing. I'm going to read the poem by the poet Jacquirin as an example of how poetry is philosophical and to give a more in-depth analysis. to be alone. It is of a color that cannot be named. This mountain where cedars rise into the autumn dusk. The philosophy of this poem is wabi-sabi. Wabi-sabi is the idea that life is imperfect, but there is beauty in imperfection. It is also an aesthetic and light view that highlights nature and asymmetry. In lines 4 through 5, there is the imagery of nature, this mountain where cedars rise into the autumn dusk. Nature is one element of wabi-sabi, and this poem also incorporates it. The most important part of this poem is the idea of imperfection. The author states, "To be alone, it is of a color that cannot be named." These lines highlight a moment where the poet is alone and he cannot name or put a color to his feelings, as he is at a loss. However, he does not despair and actually enjoys the feeling of not knowing, and instead enjoys the moment without worry. The poem's message is that there are some moments that are not perfect, but they can still be valuable. The poem's mood, tone, and words allude to the theme of wabi-sabi. That is the end of the lesson. Thank you for viewing my ARP product presentation.